Today we are in conversation with Thorben Stemann. He's a computational linguist at Kocarek, a translation company based out of Germany that is focusing more and more on conversational AI. We talk about chatbots beyond English, about how computational linguists are actually the bridge between design and engineering, the challenge of multilingual deployments and how we should focus on localization from day one rather than seeing translations as a final step after we've done all the work. Talking to Thorben, I thought back to my professor Guido Snell at the University of Amsterdam. He also worked as a translator, translating novels from Slavic languages to Dutch. And he would always say, let's not kid anyone. As a translator, you're just writing a book. It becomes something new. You are, in fact, creating something. With that in mind, how do we make sure that we don't fall into the trap of thinking about multilingual deployments too lightly? So let's jump in. I very much enjoyed this conversation with Thorben, and I know you will too. We're here today with Thorben Stemann. It's good to see you, man.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, sorry that we canceled on you last week, or we didn't get it scheduled and we messed up on the planning, but we're here now, so good to see you. Always wonderful to talk to you. So let's see where this 20-30 minutes is going to take us today.
Yeah, let's go down the rabbit hole.
Let's go down the well. Before we go down the rabbit hole, I guess first question that everybody in conversational AI has a completely different background. It's always here. Wonderful to hear sort of how you ended up in this space and how you ended up at Kocarek.
Yeah, quite by accident, actually. So I started out. I did my master's degree in computational linguistics, or the adjacent field of study. My actual master's was called Sprachtechnologie und Fremdsprachendidaktik, which translates to language or foreign language education and language technology. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a hybrid between didactics and computational linguistics. Afterwards, I got a job freelance for Linebridge, where I did a bunch of projects, most of which I can't talk about at all because I was under NDA the entire time. But I managed a bunch of projects on a language level. So I had different languages that I worked with. And then from there, because freelance wasn't, doing the things I needed it to, I decided to find a real steady job. And Kocarek was hiring specifically because they had a client who sent in a chatbot for translation. Now, Kocarek is a translation agency, which means we both have in-house translators that translate and external partners for languages that we don't have internally. And then we manage the translation projects. But that they sent in a chatbot for translation.
Yeah. So that was the first project.
That was the first contact we had with chatbots, and they had some issues with it. The client sent in data that first they didn't know was a chatbot, so they translated it just thinking it was any other Excel file, and it turned out that the other half of the chatbot that didn't end up with us was translated by a machine. So the two didn't mesh, and the bot was just a disaster. So they kind of regrouped, reconfigured, and said, okay, we need to have this professionally localized from top to bottom. And that's about the time when I joined.
So that's very interesting. So a client actually just send in, here's words and sentences that need to be translated.
Yeah, exactly. Here's words. Please make words other language. Yes,
And did it just go to one language, or was it immediately like
it was first translated to one language, and then once we proved that we had a working process that actually produced results that are workable, we got a lot more. The first language was Polish, and then now we've localized into a bunch of different variants, like German for Swiss also. French, two different kinds, Swiss and regular, Russian, Czech, Dutch as well,
So
both for Belgium and the Netherlands, I think. Yeah.
And so how many languages do you guys cover then? Because we're already, I think, at 10 plus right now. So
Yeah. So we, as an agency, we have some in-house translators. So we have some English, so German always being the default, of course. So German, English, French, one Russian, and Italian, Swedish, Spanish. Those are the ones that we usually cover. But anything else, and even those, sometimes we subcontract to outside partners in different regions. So for example, if we need to have a localization for Spanish, Spain, we can maybe provide that internally. But if we need it for Mexico,
it's a different story. Yeah,
exactly.
And everybody at Kocarek, all those languages mentioned, those are actually certified conversation designers and have access to that. So they have lots of expertise and can help with all the chatbots and voice issues. And
this is something that we are trying to build up now. So that when we have projects that come in new languages, we also have someone that can look into the language with a conversation design aspect in mind. But for many languages, of course, if for example, somebody comes to us and wants a translation for Thai for a chatbot, we would have to, set up a whole infrastructure, brief the Thai translators in Thailand, stuff like that.
Yeah, because what in general, because if you do websites or whatever content that you're localizing and translating, there's brand, there's tone of voice, there's structuring of information. So a lot of it is the same, but where is the big difference, would you say, between translating for conversational AI rather than something else?
One of the things that was the initial problem with the Polish translation, for example, was that different languages have different grammatical structures that you need to add more info or subtract info. For example, in the Slavic languages, when you speak in the past tense, the verbs all take a gender. So that means you need to know the gender of the person talking. Mm-hmm. And ideally, you would also need to know the gender of the person you're talking to. That's one of those things, as well as formal and informal speech. Is the bot universally using the same forms to address someone? Sure, that's also something that you might want to check in an email and stuff. Mm-hmm. But those are just technically sometimes also challenging, not just from a design standpoint, but how do I actually, once I have the translated file, how do I actually make sure that that's working in the infrastructure of the bot?
Yeah, because that's interesting. Because we always say with conversational AI, because there's limited real estate, whatever you communicate, the stakes just rise, right? It's more important to get it right, but then also because the nature of conversations, the grammatical challenges in various languages increase as well. So if you're, dealing with multilingual conversational AI, you have pretty much an exponential growth of challenges in a way, right?
Yeah.
And how do you? Because you have the gender issue. Lots of languages have that, and the formal versus non-formal. I think people that are in the US and just speak English have no idea maybe even what we're talking about. So
that's one of the things that I always find is very much at the core of all that is an issue with language technology. Everything is demoed and prototyped on English.
Yeah, and
it works great. Most of it works great on English. Just adding one language more, usually you realize, that sounds rough. Someone is being addressed, like you always have to add like these slashes to add both genders, and it doesn't look so great. Yeah.
And then so if I guess most big enterprises operate in different countries and deal with these languages. What do you in general see the mistake they make? Just thinking too lightly about it, or what is?
I think generally speaking, language and translation and localization in the field of bots, we don't usually like to talk about translation because localization is more accurate in this case. What they think or seem to think is that that's the last step and it's not an important one. So they first, okay, we need a bot. All right, what do we need? A bot is a piece of technology, so we need engineers, IT people. All right, stuff the room with IT people. They crank out a bot. Maybe the prompts aren't that well written, but we have some copywriters on hand that can do that. All right, it's done. Send it off to translation. Whatever comes back from translation, that's the last word. Just put that up and it's done. How much do you need to translate that? 5 hours is enough, right? That's somewhat the approach that I feel many companies still have, because they don't think about a translation basically just being a rewrite in another language.
Yeah, you're doing the whole thing again. That's also with with bot personality and some of the larger brands that we've worked with, that defines tone of voice, which is kind of the briefing again for each language again. But it's also, if you have the brand have global core values, they manifest themselves differently in different cultures, right? So
definitely
being open and loyal might mean something completely different in Thailand than in the US than in Brazil, right? So having these fundamental values and manifesting themselves and using that as a brief for your wording is complicated as it is, but you do want to maintain it within the same structure in a chatbot platform.
I mean, definitely once we talk about Asian languages, which I'm not super versed on, but I know some basic stuff, that they operate very differently from our Western understanding of how languages work. And so a lot of stuff can be quite different there that we don't think about at all. One thing that I know, for example, it's a funny anecdote that one of my professors told once. It's as a German, he was very eager to get to the point. Like he didn't want to waste time and just have small talk for the sake of it. So when he was teaching in Canada, he had a sign on his door that basically said, "Don't think I'm rude to you when I'm telling you to shut up and get to the point." Because you would have office hours for maybe an hour and a half. People would come in and say, "Oh, hey, how are you? Oh, hi, I'm great. How are you? Oh, the weather's so great." 2 minutes of your life gone, right? And he would have 15 people waiting outside wanting to talk about their theses. So he's like, get to the point so I can get done with you and get the next person in here. It's faster for everyone. I'm not being rude to you. I'm just German. And I feel like that's something that is very applicable to bots. You want your bot to be chatty, but maybe your target audience in another country actually doesn't appreciate that at all. And you need to change courses there.
Yeah, because that's already an issue with specific use cases, right? So sometimes in customer service, when people, they have a problem, so they're reaching out, so they are intrinsically motivated already to talk to you. So all you have to do is kind of facilitate that journey and make sure, that it is consistent, etc. But if you're doing more sales conversations, then people are not as motivated, so you need to work a little harder and usually persuade them more and add the chattiness and the personality to get people in a conversation with you. So there's already the dynamic of the type of use cases, but then there's also the dynamics of the various cultures and languages of what people prefer. So then I guess an interesting question becomes, because I think a lot of these chatbots, they're very hyped on you do one intent architecture. If you recognize it in German, then you just give the German response. But I guess then there's a cutoff point where, are you staying within the same intent structure, or are you just rebuilding the whole thing for a different language?
Yeah. So what we've done so far, because the bots that we've been translating so far aren't so super complex that would be a necessity, is just do that. Let's just find all the utterances, translate some of them so they have a baseline to start AI training on, and then we translate the actual replies to fit the persona and to make sure that what's communicated in the original language is also communicated there. And then also what we have as a final step is called the in-country review. Basically, if the customer has an operation set up in a country that they want the localization for, we can then provide our first draft or second draft or whatever draft to the employees of the company in that country. And they can go through and say, oh, well, those phone numbers obviously need to change because we're in a different country. Those email addresses need to change because we have a different customer support address. We have this product, but not that one, so we need to change this. This one we need to take out completely. There's a call here for action that we don't support on our website, so we can't have an API call here. So they take that stuff out or put new stuff in. That's the final step. But depending on how complex the bot is, that might not be necessary at all.
Yeah, but you say it's the final step. If we look at the conversation design workflow, there's happy conversation design, detailed conversation design. We usually see after happy conversation design where you get stakeholder sign off, like, does this make sense, et cetera, et cetera. Are we on the same page? Once that's okay, then we start going to detailed conversation design where we start training the model, where we start figuring, when do we hand people over to a website or a different channel? So you're using all that input from the stakeholders to then do detailed conversation design.
Right.
Then I guess another interesting thing in terms of localization and these translation issues is how do you train the model? Where do you get, if you have the utterances, turning them into training phrases, you're going to be working with all these different markets.
Yes. And that's one of the things that we haven't been involved with as much yet, because depending on how what clients approach us and what their internal structure is, they might have internal engineers that we can communicate with directly. They might outsource that stuff, and then we need to talk to the engineers that they hired. And they might not want to give us access directly to their platform, so we can't do the AI training. We have to kind of teach others to do it. And then, that very much depends on what the client is willing to let us do.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So even if you work in these different countries and different languages, you have a sort of a practical challenge of completely different people being involved. Yeah. So maybe, customer service, the actual department is not even involved with the deployment of a little chatbot under a website. So you need to sort of find the right people and navigate that. So you're going to have lots of delays. But then there's also the theoretical challenge, the actual training phrases. If we look at, we want our AI assistants to be inclusive, just in general, how do we understand the different nuances within a local culture that everybody feels, that we understand what everybody says so people can all feel understood.
Yeah.
So you sort of have, how do you make it inclusive, which is a similar multilingual challenge, I guess, as one actually designing conversations.
Yeah, I mean, the prototype example for this is always the whole data sets in English are trained on the so-called white man English. And, to mix that up, you want some, Black women in there and, Hispanics, and to mix that up. You need to know what are actually the minorities in the country that we're localizing to. Like for German, you would probably want to have some Turkish immigrants speak in there, like just have some data from them. We have a lot of influx now from Syria and other places. And which people do you pick for that?
Yeah, and I guess to be clear, it doesn't mean that a German chatbot needs to understand Syrian or
but how would a Syrian refugee that learned German 3 years ago speak to the bot, and would that still recognize it?
Yeah, and part of that is just understanding what someone says. But imagine, and I think when we think about empathy and AI and data, imagine that you are need to reach out to government. There's some issue with where do I stay, or I can't pay a bill. It's very emotionally charged already, right? It's a difficult conversation to have, and then somebody takes the time and effort, puts in the effort to reach out and talk to someone, but the German isn't perfect, and therefore you're completely ignored by a chatbot that doesn't understand you, right? So the implications of not training for these things and not understanding what people say, it's not just, oh wait, if you look at the data, it's like, oh, it's just a conversation that we didn't, an intent that we didn't pick up. It's like, no, you actually insulted or hurt someone's identity by not actually considering them when you were training the model, right?
Yeah.
I think that's it's important to emphasize that, I always feel, because I think a lot of companies are not aware. Yeah, they're still trying to, trying to educate people on seeing users as people, right? It's like, you're not talking to only drug dealers have users, right? That's always the phrase. It's like, no,
I need to remember that. That's a good one.
Yeah, you're talking to people, and if you just ignore what they say, you're not trained for it, and you're not equipped to, then it's a serious problem, and you need to rethink that. So when you as a multilingual AI trainer, I guess that's sort of what you guys do. How do you fit in the teams? Because you're always working with design teams a lot of times, right? So you have some conversation design expertise in the copywriting. You have those people there, but then you're also working with the different design teams, and you're working with sort of the data teams on both sides, right? What's your take on that? Like, I guess the question is, who do you take your briefings from? Do you take them from the engineers or more of the designers?
Well, I think the job description that I have, the whole idea behind computational linguistics is to be the bridge between designers and linguistics. That's just you want the linguists to be able to adapt to the technological possibilities and maybe refrain from doing things that are just outright impossible in the technological tool that you're using, and you want to educate them on that and give them advice. On the other hand, you want to sensibilize the engineers to language and say, like, yeah, you could do it this way, but it sounds weird and doesn't evoke enough emotion. And our copywriters came up with this great portfolio on prompts and phrases to say, none of which work if we do it like in a simplistic way, right? So you need to kind of bridge the gap between those two factions. So yeah, it's kind of both.
And do you then there's obviously different types of technologies, right? Some are Rasa is very much an engineer's platform, so the gap from the engineering side to the design that's a big bridge to build in a way,
and that's where all sorts of companies spring up now, where you can where you have your nice GUIs, both to deal with Rasa and other such template only platforms, or you have things like our partner Cognigy and bot friends who just make the entire GUI and provide integrations, NLU and stuff like that out of the box to kind of facilitate. We have engineers who can do great things, but there's also copywriters who can just work with our tool and produce a bot even though they don't know how to code.
Yeah. And do you see with one or the other side of the spectrum, the challenges for the multilingual stuff increase or decrease? Because I can also imagine that if you're really working with an engineer's platform, that once you figured out the multilingual differences in syntax, that it might be easier to implement or customize these things, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't know.
That strongly depends on your use cases and what you actually want to do. Like I have a series on a YouTube channel where I'm mostly working with Cognigy AI, where I'm trying to find like curious language specific use cases and try to emulate them and kind of show people that it's possible to do.
What are some of the use cases like that?
For example, what we were talking about earlier with the specific grammatical things in language. I had this example. I've seen this a bunch of times already. When you're starting to research what are chatbots, what is conversation design, you get a lot of these demos where somebody orders pizza through a bot. That's usually one of them. Or they want to order a phone or some other technological device. And what always happens in those is once you have your order confirmed, the bot parrots it back to you so you can confirm it, Yeah. And those messages, they need to be, you can't hard code all of them. They need to be generated from a data set. So you have a data set, let's take the pizza, right? You have maybe your restaurant has pizzas and burgers, and then you have different toppings.
That's a terrible restaurant, man. Never go to a place that sells both pizzas and burgers.
But let's say they have those two categories and they have different toppings for each, right? So you just record first, does the user want a pizza or a burger, and then what goes onto that. And then at the end, it just says, oh, so you ordered a burger with fries and no cheese. So this message in English is relatively easy to build because you know all of the words and they don't change at all. You can just plug them in. Yeah. You're done. Yeah, try that in German. Not only do you need to know what gender are they, because they have different articles in front of them, determiners. But sometimes if they change from singular to plural, you might need to change the stem of the word. It's wild. So that stuff, how do I get my bot to reply in grammatically correct sentences? I could, of course, say, so you ordered, burger, / no cheese, right? But that doesn't sound great. And if you're using a voice app, for example, that's a no-go.
Terrible. Yeah,
it's terrible.
So we're using a lot of times English as our default language, which is a pretty simple language. Should we use the most complicated one and use that as our default language, and then the rest of it is sort of simple?
I think there is a good argument to be made that if you speak another language than English, you should always be thinking about, how would I do this in my own language? That's like the minimum baseline I would like. I don't speak Finnish or Korean, but I know those are agglutinative language, like Turkish and Hungarian as well. So they work very differently. So if I'm a Finnish native speaker and I built a bot in English, can I actually do that in Finnish? Or would I run into problems? Where would I run into problems? And then try and fix those before they come up.
So always, almost like you do a Wizard of Oz test for each design, right? You create your first draft and then you test it out with 5 to 10 people, and usually you discover like 100 things that are wrong with it, so you can fix it. And it's a good sanity check, right? Because the first person you test it with, they say something that you hadn't considered, and you're back to the drawing board. So you could do that. You could be your own Wizard of Oz tester from a language point of view, where it's like, okay, if now just do this conversation in Dutch for me, does it make sense? And then maybe if you got a German friend, bring in 2 extra languages, see if it still holds up, and if that's the case, then just continue on the path that you're on, because you're making something that is localizable. Is that a word? Localizable? I guess. Sure, it is now.
Let's make it one. Yes. Definitely. Anywhere where you have variables in your conversation design, that's usually that's a giveaway. Like, think about if that actually works in any other language that you know.
And that's interesting, because then if you look at AI ethics and inclusivity, you want your design team to be diverse, right? It helps. The example that you heard earlier, have, instead of just white men in the room, have the black woman and have the Hispanic and I don't know what else was on your list. But then now, as part of that inclusive design team, you should also have them work in different languages. They should also have different languages that they bring to that team to do a sanity check on the core structure of the designs. Does that make sense?
For companies in Europe, that's actually not that big of a deal, I think. They just need to be willing to do it, because most companies, I feel, are multilingual enough already to facilitate that.
Yeah.
And they don't need to be on paper. Usually if you're a big conglomerate, you might have a corporate language that's English, and then your different offices obviously operate in their local language every day. But that means you have people on staff already who speak different languages.
Yeah.
So they don't even need to be like super conversed in conversation design. They can just give you their opinion on a language.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And then if you, let's say like 5 years from now, every company is looking to create, automate 85% of conversations, make them personal, make them transactional. If that is really the path you're going to go down, and you're going to do that in all these different markets, thinking about these things already now, like creating the operational structure and the technological structure to be able to do this multilingual operation. Do you think we're at the point now already that it is crucial to start investing in that, or is it just create some awareness and know that this is going to be a big problem down the line? How urgent is this?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know. Definitely awareness is key. If you don't know that there might be a problem, then you're just going to run into traps. And once the project has been designed to a certain extent, let's say you started in English, you have your bot for 3 years, going great. Now you add French and Russian. Nothing's working. All the infrastructure that you've built for the bot, like all the flows, you can't just plug in Russian sentences because the way that it operates just doesn't jive with the language. Then what? You would have to start from scratch and start anew. That's not great. So if you had thought about maybe some things in the first stages, you could have avoided that.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess this goes for every project that every international corporation has, right? It's the same traps, and
I don't actually know if going into projects with a too much of an open mind is also a great idea, because you do want to take it one step at a time. You might want to think about the future steps and be aware that there might be complications, but also you don't want to be in your head also developing an Arabic version of your bot when you know that it's like 5 years down the road, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to take up too much mental capacity.
Yeah, so you could be aware that there might be a problem, but it might be totally fine, and then it just becomes like a risk analysis and a cost, effort, value, metrics that a consultant can help you with. Right? I never know how to do that.
Math, it's magic.
It's Matt. So if you, if I'm a conversation designer, AI trainer, manager, listening to this, what is there a book that you think I should read, or maybe a different resource to just educate myself a bit more on this?
I'm blanking on books now. I might have some that I'm not thinking of right now, but
it's totally fine. We'll add them in the description so people just check that out.
One that I wish I had looked up the title, which I kind of love to read and also got very depressed by reading, was I'm totally blanking on the title, but it's basically about how experts are often wrong. It's very entertainingly written, but in more of a serious subtext, because they discuss like how confident are people, and the more confident people are, the more wrong they are, but they are perceived as right more often than not. Goes into like the stock market and stuff like that, how people who appear successful often just make huge losses and kind of just got there by accident.
Yeah, so the ego gets involved and they start to believe too much in themselves.
Yeah, but also
they have the confidence with it.
There are just naturally random events that we tend to interpret as either reinforcing our behavior or taking as a precaution, which have nothing to do with what we were doing, but because we kind of internalize them, they kind of shape how we think about things, and then we might actually go down a bad path. It also goes into things like gambling and how our psyche works and how we convince ourselves that we're the greatest at all times. It's kind of depressing, but like I said, it's actually an entertaining read, because you start to think about all the times that you may have misjudged your own judgment, because you've made something that you were initially proud of, and then someone said, that doesn't look useful, and then you start doubting yourself, and it's like, did I actually make something that's crap? Oh no.
That's brilliant. Yeah, so you'll find a title, we'll add it to the notes, and it just got me thinking, because now you've got a book that says why the experts are always wrong. I know there's a very popular TED Talk that says why the majority of people is always wrong. So I guess nobody's ever right. And on that note, Thorben, it was great having you here today with us. For people, go to what's the website? Where do people find you?
Yeah, just look for Kocarek, which is spelled Kocark. Kocarek, the German formation, it's GmbH, Gemeinschaft mit beschränkter Haftung. You can find us also on LinkedIn. I'm trying to be more active there, and we're now partnered with the CDI, so there should be a backlink also through your website.
Yeah. So there's lots of all roads lead to Kocarek. I will probably
Hopefully
also,
one day,
yeah, we'll probably create some content together as well, more around the in-depth stuff of what do I need to think about? How do I make sure that I design for all these languages? So we'll be working a lot together. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. Be in touch. Hey there, you made it to the end. Congratulations. I really appreciate that. I know you're busy, so you've listened to a full episode, so congrats on you. Great job. So now what should we talk about? No, I'm just kidding. First of all, thanks. Second of all, if you want to learn more about Conversation Design Institute, I highly recommend that you go to the website conversationdesigninstitute.com, and there you can sign up for a free account and start your learning journey. So you can learn about AI training, conversation design, conversational copywriting. There's lots of technology courses. So now that you've gathered these technology agnostic skills, what are you going to do next? Are you going to learn about AllenApp, Qbox, Rasa, Cognigy? We have all these different technology courses as well. So there's a whole portfolio. So I recommend, going there, creating a free account, watching a few videos. If that's enough for you, great. If you want more, you can just enroll and become a certified professional. These courses are really good if you are, an individual designer, writer that wants to learn about conversational AI. But if you're an enterprise and you're looking to scale up your team, lots of enterprises onboard their entire team to these courses to scale them up quickly. And it's also an option to add extra workshops with that and extra coaching sessions, so you quickly get that enterprise team where you want it to be. If that's a little too much, maybe there's also papers you can download on the website, maybe learn a bit about how we've helped Vodafone scale up 100 people in different countries, in different languages, using different technologies, creating the Toby chatbot in apps, on websites, in voice, all these types of things. So you can learn about that too. The best way to stay in touch, follow the podcast. You'll hear all the latest updates. Say hello on Twitter. HVDAM is my handle. Stands for Hans van Dam, obviously. Or just type in my name on LinkedIn. I post regularly. I like to engage with people there. So feel free to do that. So again, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Happy to meet again for the next one.